The cage beneath the ground was cracked and dead, and smoke still floated in the sky, even though the war had ended many months ago. Ryan walked slowly through the ruins, wearing a dusty jacket and an old oxygen mask strapped to his face. His boots crunched over broken glass and scorched metal. He was just a scavenger, looking for anything useful to sell food supplies. Alien tech, even broken wires, were worth something these days. His scanner beeped softly, showing strange energy below. The surface of a half-buried alien bunker. Curiosity pulled him forward. The bunker door was jammed, but a metal beam helped him pry it open. A foul smell rushed out, but he pushed on down the steps into the darkness. Inside the bunker it was silent. No lights, no movement, just the sound of dripping water and the low hum of his scanner. He stepped carefully past fallen pipes and melted walls. The scanner's beeping grew louder. Near a sealed metal hatch, something behind it was still alive. The hatch had claw marks on the inside, deep scratches like someone had tried to escape. The control panel was broken, so Ryan forced the hatch open with all his strength. When it cracked open, a soft sound escaped from the dark. It was a whisper, or maybe a sob. He shined his flashlight inside and froze there in the corner, chained to the wall. Was a girl, not human, but close. She was thin, her skin pale with a soft lavender glow, her hair long and tangled like silver threads. Her arms were covered in bruises and her eyes, large and glowing, faintly stared at him like she couldn't believe he was real. She didn't speak, she only stared, then flinched and pulled back, expecting pain. Ryan dropped his weapon and held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. Slowly, he stepped forward. She didn't fight when he checked her chains. They were locked with an alien code, but Ryan had seen this kind before. He used a small tool, and after a minute, the lock clicked open. Her legs were weak, and she collapsed into his arms as soon as the chains fell. She was so light, almost weightless. He could feel her shivering. He wrapped his jacket around her and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." She looked up at him and tried to speak, but only one broken word came out. "Help." Ryan nodded once and picked her up. He carried her through the ruined halls, up the steps, and out into the harsh light of the dead world. The sunlight hurt her eyes, and she buried her face against his chest. As he walked back to his shelter, he kept looking over his shoulder. Something didn't feel right. He didn't see anyone, but it felt like eyes were watching them from the ash-covered hills. He moved faster, keeping the girl close. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She just held onto him like he was the only real thing left in her world. When they reached the shelter, he laid her gently on a makeshift bed and covered her with more blankets. She coughed weakly and tried to sit up, but Ryan stopped her gently and gave her water from a cracked canteen. She drank slowly, eyes never leaving his face. He tried talking to her again, asking for her name, where she was from, who did this to her, but she didn't understand or couldn't speak. Finally, he remembered the old translator chip buried in his storage box. He activated it and placed it near her ear. The machine hummed softly and her eyes widened. She opened her mouth and said something in her language. The chip translated it in his ear. "I was forgotten." Left here. Ryan's jaw clenched. He didn't know who she was or why someone would lock her in a cage underground, but one thing was clear: she had no one else, and now she was his responsibility. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out and she fell forward. He caught her again, and this time she didn't resist. She rested her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. For the first time in who knows how long, she felt warm and safe. Ryan didn't know what to do next, but he knew he couldn't leave her here, not in this dead world, not after what she'd been through. He looked at her sleeping form, her silver hair glowing softly in the light, and whispered quietly, "Don't worry. I'll protect you." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the low hum of something moving across the sky. Above, a tiny red light blinked once in the distance, then vanished. The girl was no longer hidden, and someone or something was already on their trail. Her name was Alarith. Next morning, Ryan sat by the edge of the old campfire, watching the girl sleep, curled under layers of fabric, her chest rising slowly with each breath. The sun had barely risen, and the ruins around them were still cast in cold shadow. He had given her food the night before, but she had only taken a few bites, as if unsure whether it was real or safe. Now she stirred, eyes blinking open. Her glowing silver irises met his, and for a moment there was only silence, broken by the soft crackle of the fire. Ryan activated the translator again and placed it near her. The device blinked twice and hummed. He leaned forward and spoke gently. "Do you understand me now?" The girl stared, then nodded. Slowly, her voice soft, like wind on broken glass, she said few words. "I understand. Not all, but enough." He smiled a little and pointed to himself. "Ryan." She repeated it carefully. "Ryan." Her voice wrapped around the name like a question. He nodded again, then waited. Her eyes dropped, then looked back up. "I am called Alari. Prisoner code C479, last living daughter of House Velterin." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned her face away. But Ryan didn't ask more. He stood and brought her another can of water. She drank carefully, her fingers trembling. She was still weak, but stronger than yesterday. She was trying to sit taller, her pride fighting her pain. After a few quiet minutes, she spoke again. "You saved me." I don't know why he shrugged, because no one else did. She stared at him, as if those words were too big to understand. In her world, kindness was rare, maybe even dangerous. But Ryan didn't explain himself further. Instead, he stepped outside to check his scanner. Red light that blinked the night before had returned, this time closer and pulsing faster. Something or someone was tracking them, maybe using old signals from the bunker, or maybe it was the ones who left her there. Either way, they couldn't stay long. When he came back inside, Hilary was sitting upright, wrapped in blankets with her hands folded. She looked at him and said, in broken English, "They will come again for me. Maybe worse next time. You should go." But Ryan sat down across from her and shook his head. "I didn't pull you out just to throw you away." Now her eyes shimmered at those words. She didn't smile, but her face softened for the first time since he found her. That night she didn't sleep far. She stayed close by, resting near the fire. While he watched the skies through a small crack in the wall, a deep hum passed overhead. Once, but the signal didn't stop, which meant whatever was following them had not found them yet, but it was only a matter of time. In the early morning light, she reached out and touched his arm gently. Ryan turned to her. She looked down as she spoke softly. "When I was chained, I used to dream someone would come, that they would take me away, and not ask anything, not want anything, just help. You came, you were real." He didn't know what to say, but the silence between them was enough. Her fingers lingered on his jacket, as if checking that he was still there, still real. She whispered again in her tongue. Then the translator caught up. "Thank you for giving me back the wind. I thought I had no sky left to fly in." Ryan looked at her, surprised by the poetry of it, but also saddened by how much she had lost later. He gave her a small alien blade for protection, not that she could fight in her state, but it gave her something to hold on to, something that said, "You are not helpless anymore." Fingers wrapped around the hilt with surprising memory. Perhaps she was once trained, or maybe she had held on to hope in her own way. All these years they left the ruined shelter before the second sun rose. Higher the scanner beeped louder, now confirming their trail was being followed. Ryan helped her walk, but Hilary insisted on using her legs, even if they trembled every few steps. She was determined to not be baggage, to not be dead. "Wait," she pointed toward the east, toward a range of broken hills. "There is a cave, their old safe place. We used long ago, before war, maybe still empty, maybe still good." Ryan nodded, and they moved in that direction. And the way she began telling him more in pieces, through the translator, her people had been peaceful, but her house was marked by an alien faction, who feared her bloodline. They thought her genes could influence leadership among other species, so they tried to erase her family. When she was captured, she was offered a deal, agreed to marry one of their commanders, and her life would be spared. She refused again and again, until they stopped asking, and just locked her. Awarian clenched his fists, as she spoke, his boots pressing harder into the dirt. Every word made it clearer that she had lived through something far worse than just war. She had survived betrayal, abandonment, and the slow death of being forgotten. When they reached the edge of the broken hills, Hilary paused, breathing heavily. She looked at him with something new in her eyes, not fear, not pain, but trust, maybe even the beginning of something more. Then she whispered, "I will follow you wherever you walk, even if I fall again." Ryan held her hand and gave a small nod. They stepped into the shadows of the cave behind them. The sky shimmered with a faint red glow, and the signal that hunted her pulsed one more time, growing closer still. The soldiers came for her. The cave was cold and smelled of damp rock, but it was better than the open sky. Ryan helped Hilary sit near the inner wall, where moss glowed faintly with biolight. The floor was uneven and rough, but she seemed calm here, her eyes scanning the darkness, as if she remembered every corner from long ago. "This place is old, forgotten. They never searched here before," she said softly. Ryan nodded and unpacked a small heater cube, placing it near her feet. The warmth spread. Slowly, she pulled her cloak tighter and watched him move around like she was memorizing every action, every habit. That night, they ate quietly. Ryan gave her dried rations, and she chewed them slowly without complaint. In the silence, he kept checking his scanner, its red pulse flashing every few seconds. Stronger now, closer. He knew someone was tracking them, but he didn't want to tell her. She had enough to carry already. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. "If they find us, we'll go with them. You don't need to fight." Ryan stopped chewing, looked straight at her, and shook his head. "Not happening. You're not property. You're not going back." She looked at him like she didn't believe anyone would ever say that to her. Past midnight, the scanner went dark for a second, then blinked red 3 times. It meant movement nearby, maybe only minutes away. Ryan grabbed his old rifle and motioned for her to stay hidden deeper in the cave. She obeyed, but her fingers gripped the small blade he had given her. He placed a metal plate over the entrance, hoping it would blend with the rocks, and waited, his breath slow and silent. The wind outside carried voices muffled in alien tones. They weren't speaking in her language or his, but something harsh and military trained. A moment later, two figures stepped inside the cave holding high-tech plasma rifles and scanning devices. Ryan stepped forward slowly, hands up, acting calm. "Lost traveler," he said in broken alien tongue. The soldiers stopped. One raised a scanner toward Ryan. The other looked around suspiciously. "This is restricted zone. What is your purpose here?" Ryan faked a confused look. "I heard old tech here, just salvaging, not aware of any law." The soldiers exchanged looks, then began to search the cave. Ryan's heart pounded, but he didn't show it. He stood still, letting them pass him by. One soldier stepped dangerously close to the hidden panel behind which Alari crouched, blade ready. Then he paused, scanner in hand. The device blinked faintly, but not enough to alert suspicion. Just an echo, perhaps. The soldier grunted and moved on, but before leaving, he tossed a small hovering drone into the air. The round machine floated near the ceiling, its red eye blinking. Ryan knew what that meant. They had marked this cave, and even if they left now, others would come, smarter ones, with orders to burn everything they found. Once the soldiers exited, Ryan waited a full minute before sliding open the hidden panel. Alari crawled out, her body tense, her voice shaking. "I thought they saw me. I thought it was over." He helped her stand. "No, we still have time, but we need to move now. The drone will report back soon. We won't be safe here." She nodded quickly. They packed everything in silence. Every second felt heavy when they stepped into the open air. Ryan noticed strange marks near the rocks. Bootprints, not his, and not the soldiers. Someone else had been nearby, watching, perhaps choosing not to act yet. But why? They moved fast, following a path Alari remembered from childhood. It twisted through broken canyons and led to a dry riverbed scattered with alien bones from an old battle here. She stopped, catching her breath, and pointed that way. "There's a hidden trail we used for escape years ago." Ryan followed without question, trusting her memory, despite the years. By the time the second sun began to rise, they reached a jagged rock wall. Behind it, Alari revealed a thin tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. On the other side was an open valley, untouched by war, filled with windgrass and ruins covered in green. She smiled faintly. This was once a village, a safe place long ago. Ryan helped her down a slope and into a small broken house. She sank to the ground, tired but relieved. "We have one day, maybe two, before they find this place." Ryan nodded and sat beside her, watching the horizon. Later, as they sat in silence, Ryan asked something that had bothered him since the cave. "Why didn't you run when you heard the soldiers? You could have fled or fought or even surrendered." Alari looked at him and whispered, "Because I knew you would not leave me, and I wanted to believe that maybe not all promises are lies." He didn't answer, just sat there, letting her words stay in the air. She rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes for the first time in a long time. Her breathing was calm. Outside, beyond the hills, a ship broke through the clouds, its engines low and deadly. There, time was running out, but for this one moment, they felt like they had already won. Into the storm. The next morning, wind howled across the ruined valley. Clouds thick and dark swirled above like warning signs from the sky. Ryan stood at the edge of a crumbled wall, staring into the distance, where a faint ship trail cut across the clouds. They were searching grid by grid. Slow and steady, they would find this place soon. Behind him, Alari knelt near a stone circle, her fingers brushing the old markings. She whispered something in her language, her voice full of sadness and memory. Ryan didn't interrupt. This place meant something to her, a piece of a life before the pain, before the cage. They packed quietly and moved before the second sun rose fully. Alari walked better, now still slow but steady, each step more sure than the last. She said little but stayed close, her eyes scanning every ridge. Every sound made her flinch, but she kept going. Ryan admired that strength. She wasn't just surviving, she was choosing to walk forward, even with the fear gripping her bones. They followed the path deeper into the hills, where storm clouds thickened and the land turned sharp and broken. Ancient machines lay rusted, half buried in the earth, some still humming with lost power. It was here that Alari paused, her voice a whisper. Again, once this was a testing field, they built weapons here, things that should never breathe. "I don't know what's left." Ryan looked around, uneasy. Something about the silence felt wrong, not peaceful. Just waiting. As they climbed the slope, lightning cracked above them, thunder rolled through the sky like the growl of a beast. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, soaking them both. Within minutes, they found a half-buried transport wreck. Its roof collapsed, but the back still intact. They crawled inside for cover. Ryan lit a small lantern and sat against the wall, watching Alari shake water from her hair, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at him, and smiled not with her mouth but with her eyes. Something soft and quiet passed between them. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small metal charm, twisted and scorched. She placed it in his hand. My sister gave this to me before the soldiers came. It means promise in our tongue. I want you to have it. Now Ryan turned it over slowly, the edges sharp, the surface marked with ancient symbols. He closed his hand around it and nodded. I'll keep it safe. She smiled again, this time letting it show later. As the storm raged louder outside, Ryan checked the scanner. It beeped once, then twice. Something was moving, not far from their path, but it didn't match the soldiers' pattern. Too fast, too quiet. Maybe a drone, maybe something worse. He stood and checked his weapon, then glanced at Alari, who was already watching him. You feel it too, she said softly, like something is crawling beneath the wind. They left the wreck just before nightfall, moving through thick mud and falling ash. The storm had torn trees from the ground and shattered old ruins. Lightning lit up the sky in flashes, turning the world into flickering images. Alari slipped once, and Ryan caught her. She leaned on him for a moment, breathing hard, then straightened and whispered, I won't fall again, not while you hold me. Her words warmed him, even through the cold rain. As they crossed a narrow ridge, a strange howl echoed through the rocks, deep and low. Not animal, not machine, but something between. Ryan stopped and pulled Alari behind a broken pillar, watching the shadows. Something moved across the ridge below them, tall, thin, and gliding over the rocks. Its body shimmered like oil under starlight. It had no face, only a smooth mask and long arms ending in curved claws. It stopped, turned slowly, as if smelling the air, then vanished. Behind the rocks, Alari gripped his arm tightly, her voice trembling. That is a soul hunter, old enemy of my people. They are used by certain warlords to track rare blood. It must be searching for me. Ryan looked down. The path ahead was long and open. If they ran, the thing might hear, but if they stayed, it would find them sooner or later. We move fast, no noise, just wind and breath, he said quietly. She nodded once, and together they moved through the dark. The hunter passed behind them once, twice, never looking directly their way, but always close, like it was listening to the earth, waiting for one wrong step. Ryan led her into a narrow pass, where the walls curved high, and the sound of rain covered their movement. Just as they reached the end of the hunter appeared behind them, its mask gleaming in the light of a lightning flash. It screeched, not with sound, but through the air, like a blade cutting silence. Ryan spun and fired 3 shots. One struck its leg. The thing staggered, then vanished in a burst of smoky. Alari pulled him forward. Run now, she shouted, and they did, through mud and wind, until their lungs burned and legs shook. They didn't stop until they reached a hollow under a giant root-covered hill. There they collapsed, gasping, soaking wet but alive. Alari turned to him, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Thank you again. I would not have made it alone. Ryan met her eyes and whispered, neither would I. Outside, the storm screamed across the world, but inside the hollow, for the first time, they felt like they were no longer just running, they were fighting back together. The marriage bond. The next morning, light filtered through the roots above them, soft and golden. The storm had passed, leaving behind silence and damp earth. Alari opened her eyes slowly, and found Ryan already awake, sitting near the entrance with his weapon across his knees, watching the hills. His eyes tired but focused. She sat up, stretching her sore limbs, and whispered, You didn't sleep. He shook his head. Not much. They moved again by midday, walking through wild grass that reached their knees. The valley ahead looked untouched by war, filled with broken stone towers, covered in vines and flowers that shimmered faintly in the wind. Alari smiled at the sight. This place is sacred, to my people, forgotten by most. It was once a place of vows where bloodlines joined, and peace was spoken in firelight. In followed her across a fallen bridge, and through a stone archway into the heart of the ruins. The scent of flowers and old dust filled the air. Alari moved, slowly touching the carvings on the walls, whispering names he did not understand. At the center of the ruins stood a tall tree, glowing softly with pale blue light, its roots wrapped around a pool of clear water. She stepped toward it, knelt, and placed her hand over her heart. Ryan watched silently, unsure if he should speak. She looked back at him and said, This is where my parents bound their fate. It is where I was to choose a mate before the war came. He stepped closer and asked gently, Do you want to stay here? Alari stood, her eyes glowing with something stronger than memory, something like peace. She nodded yes, but not to hide, to remember who I was, and to choose now, not as a prisoner, but as a soul with freedom. Ryan didn't move for a moment, then reached into his pack and pulled out the charm she gave him. He tied it around his wrist and looked into her eyes. Whatever happens next, we walk together, right? She stepped close and placed her forehead against his. Yes, always. A voice broke the moment, deep and old. The village elder emerged from the shadows, his robe tattered but eyes sharp. He had watched them since they entered, and now approached slowly with respect. He bowed before. Alarian spoke, "Daughter of Velteron, you walk again under the sky, and with a stranger who holds your hand." Alari nodded gently, and the elder turned to Ryan, his voice curious and warm. "Do you know what she is, what she carries in her blood?" Ryan shook his head. "No, but I know she is someone I will never leave." The elder smiled, then placed his hand on Ryan's shoulder, then let it fall. "The bond is spoken, even without words. You have chosen each other, and in this place that carries weight, we will honor it, as tradition commands." Preparations began quickly, though. Few villagers remained. They brought cloth and fruit, and small glowing stones that hummed with life. Alari stood among them, dressed in a robe of dark blue, with silver threads, her hair braided with beads that shimmered like stars. She looked different, not just in dress, but in spirit, stronger, more alive. Ryan wore a simple sash marked with the same symbol on her charm, and stood beside her before the ancient tree. The elder raised his hands and spoke in a tongue Ryan didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. Alari stepped forward, placed her hand on Ryan's chest, and said with steady voice, "You pulled me from the dark, not for gain or glory, but because you saw me as someone worth saving. I have no kingdom, no crown, only a heart that chooses freely now, and it chooses you." Ryan touched her hand and whispered, "Then I promise I will never let go." The villagers watched in silence, then one by one they bowed, and the bond was sealed, not with rings or paper, but with the breath of two people who chose each other in a world broken by war. As night fell, the fire was lit in the center of the ruins. They shared food and stories, and Alari laughed for the first time in Ryan's memory, a soft melodic sound that made his chest ache. In a good way. Later, under the stars, she sat beside him by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder, her voice low and warm. "Today I became something again, not just a survivor, not a prisoner, not a hidden name. I became yours, and you became mine." He held her hand tight and said nothing, just let the silence speak for both of them. But peace never lasted long in this world. While they rested in the glow of the fire beyond the hills, metal wings cut through the clouds, and machines moved across the dirt. The ones who had marked her long ago had picked up her trail again, and this time they were not sending scouts or hunters, they were sending an army. Ryan felt it in his bones, and the grip of Alari's hand confirmed she knew it too. But neither moved yet. This night belonged to them, and they would not let fear steal it away. Taken again. The wind was too quiet the next morning. Birds did not sing, and even the insects had fallen silent. Ryan stood at the edge of the ruins, gripping his rifle, while Alari sat by the sacred pool, her fingers gently tracing the water's surface. Her smile faded when she looked toward the hills. A strange tension curled in the air, like a string pulled too tight. Ryan noticed the old villager walking fast toward them, face pale and worried. His voice was rushed when he spoke. "Enemy ships spotted beyond the third ridge, not scouts, full war-class transports coming this way." Ryan nodded, his face hardening. He turned to Alari. "We need to go now." But Alari's eyes didn't show fear, only quiet understanding. She rose to her feet and stepped close to him, her voice calm and strong. "We will run if we must, but if they come to take me, I will not let them use you against me." Ryan shook his head. "You think I'd let them take you again? I'd rather burn the sky than lose you." She touched his cheek and smiled sadly, then whispered, "Not everything is in our hands, not always." She pulled something from her robe, a small chip, barely the size of a fingernail, and pressed it into his palm. "Keep this, it has all the data about my bloodline, the truth they want to hide. If I fall, this must reach someone who will speak it out loud." Ryan clenched the chip tight, his jaw set. "I won't need it, because I'm not letting them take youth." Villagers began to evacuate, heading toward the old tunnels under the hill. Alari and Ryan helped the young and elderly move quickly, but, as they reached the entrance, a sharp sound split the air, a scream of engines, and the crackle of plasma fire. Something exploded behind them, throwing smoke and heat across the field. A transport ship dropped from the sky, and soldiers in dark armor spilled out fast and organized. Ryan turned with his weapon, but it was too late. In the chaos, someone grabbed Alari from behind, a stun weapon pressed to her back. She cried out once, reaching for him, and he ran to her, but another blast sent him flying to the ground. He'd struggled to rise, ears ringing, vision blurred, but he saw her being pulled into the ship, her eyes wide with fear, but not for herself. For him. She shouted something in her language, and the chip in his palm burned faintly with light. He tried to stand again, but hands grabbed him, the villagers pulling him back. "No," they said, "we need you alive. We need the truth." He fought them, screaming her name, as the ship lifted into the sky, disappearing into the clouds, with a roar and a trail of flame. That night he sat alone in the broken village, the fire cold and his hands shaking. He stared at the sky where the ship had vanished again. She was gone, taken from him like a nightmare repeating itself. But something was different this time. He was not just a scavenger or a bystander. Now he was her bondmate, her protector, and the one who carried her legacy in his hand. He looked at the charm still tied around his wrist, then at the chip glowing softly in the dirt. He picked it up and whispered, "I will find you. I don't care where they take you. I will break through every wall, burn down every gate until I see you again." His voice broke, but his eyes stayed sharp. He spent the next 2 days gathering what remained: weapons, fuel maps, old data cores from the ruins. He fixed the old CUM station and traced the enemy ship's warp trail, a line of energy like a scar in the stars. He found a name to encode it in one of the old archives. Baron Vex, a warlord who specialized in capturing rare bloodlines and selling them to dying empires for experiments or twisted rituals. Rion loaded a stolen shuttle with everything he needed and took off before dawn. The stars opened before him, cold and endless, but he felt no fear, only purpose. Every memory of Ilari's voice, her laughter, her pain pushed him forward. He repeated her name like a vow over and over. As the ship sliced through space, he knew this was no longer just about rescue. This was war, and he had already chosen his side. Far away inside a cold metallic prison, Ilari sat chained once again, her eyes closed, her body weak, but her spirit unbroken. They had taken her, but they had not broken the bond, not the one made under the sacred tree, not the one sealed by choice, not chains. She whispered his name like a prayer and waited for the storm she knew he would bring behind her metal walls. Lights flickered, and the guards laughed, but she smiled softly, because deep inside, she believed he was already coming. She called him husband. The prison ship drifted in the dark between 2 shattered moons, its hull scarred and humming with silent weapons inside, deep in the lower decks. Ilari sat in a cold chamber, her arms chained, her head lowered, but her mind sharp. She had counted every hour, every shift change, every vibration in the floor that marked the engines. Her captors thought she was broken again, silent again, but they didn't see the fire behind her quiet eyes. They didn't know that each time she whispered Ryan's name, it wasn't out of fear or weakness. It was a signal to herself that he was coming, that he would never stop. Far across space, Ryan flew through an asteroid belt in the stolen shuttle. Every second mattered. The trail had grown faint, but the chip Ilari gave him pulsed with energy, guiding him like a compass. He had stopped sleeping 3 days ago. His eyes bloodshot, his hands steady. Only because of pure will, he had broken into a border station, stolen clearance codes, and learned the name of the station where Baron Vex kept his rarest prizes. It was a fortress orbiting a dying planet, its defenses brutal, its reputation cruel. But Ryan didn't care. He was going in with or without a plan. He arrived during a shift cycle, when the outer defenses powered down briefly for a solar recharge. Using the stolen codes, he bypassed the first 2 security rings, landing the shuttle under the cover of a drifting mining barge. Once inside, he moved like a ghost, silent, fast, brutal. He wore scavenged armor and carried 3 alien weapons slung across his back. Anyone who stood in his path fell before they could speak. Alarms began to scream, red lights painted the halls, but Ryan didn't slow. He followed the signal in the chip, straight to the deepest chamber. On the other side of the cell door, Ilari looked up, eyes glowing as the lights flickered. Her heart skipped once as she felt a change in the air. Then the wall exploded inward, and through smoke and fire, Ryan walked. In blood on his armor, sparks flying around him. Her captors raised their weapons, but Ryan moved faster. A shot to the first, a blade to the second, a final blast silencing the last one. He reached her chains and broke them. Without a word, she stood, slowly, her body weak, but her spirit burning, as she stepped into his arms and held him like the world had finally returned. They said nothing at first, only held each other, until the alarms grew louder and the floor began to shake. Ryan pulled back and looked into her eyes. "We're going home." She nodded once, then whispered, "I knew you'd come. You always come." He took her hand and led her through the flames, every hall behind them filled with smoke, and collapsed. Metal outside, they reached the edge of the launch deck where soldiers surrounded them, but Ryan raised his weapon not in surrender, but in fury, and beside him, Ilari stepped forward and shouted in her language, a command of ancient power. The soldiers hesitated, unsure, faces shifting from certainty to fear. A blast from above tore through the deck as Ryan's shuttle returned on autopilot, responding to the signal chip he fired, covering Ilari. As they ran aboard, the engines roared and the shuttle shot into the void behind them. The station erupted in light, the shockwave chasing them through space, but they didn't stop. They didn't speak. Only when the silence of deep space returned, did Ryan finally turn to her and hold her face in his hands, his voice breaking. "You're safe now." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and said softly, "No. I'm yours." They didn't return to the village. They found a new world, one untouched by war, where wind danced through golden trees and water sang at the edge of the cliffs. Ryan built a small home with his hands while Alari planted glowing flowers from her world each day. They grew stronger together. Sometimes they spoke of what happened, but often they just sat in silence, fingers entwined. Heart steady one evening. As the sun set behind twin moons, Alari looked at him and whispered in a voice filled with warmth and wonder, "Do you know what? I told the stars every night when I was taken. I told them my husband is coming." For me, Ryan turned to her eyes wide. "You called me your husband," she smiled and nodded. "You were before you even knew it, the day you pulled me from that cage. I gave you my heart, not with words, but with everything I had left. Now I give it again." Freely. Ryan didn't need to answer. He just pulled her close and held her as the stars blinked above their quiet world. Somewhere far away, empires still fought, blood still spilled, but for them the war was over. The fire was gone, and what remained was a bond stronger than chains. Stronger than war, a bond that began in darkness and ended in light.